They touched your goodbye like it was air. Now it suffocates them nightly. They called it closure, but still flinch when your name rises. You weren't a chapter. You were the book they refused to finish. They erased your number. Still check every unknown call. They mocked your stillness. Now crave your chaos. You gave them soul. They gave you silence. They left you behind. But your scent still lingers in their future. You weren't too much. They were too hollow. They traded your love for noise. Now silence haunts them. You weren't hard to love. Just hard to replace. They let you go. But still wear your words under their skin. They buried you in gossip. Now dig through grief for resurrection. You were their peace. But they only knew war. They laughed at your softness. Now fear every soft memory. You weren't the heartbreak, they were. They ghosted you. Now haunted by your presence. You lit their world. They blamed you for the shadows. They dismissed your love. Now romanticize your absence. You were never optional. Just irreplaceably misunderstood. They pretended you didn't matter. Their insomnia proves otherwise. You gave forever. They borrowed you for a season. They chose pride. Now pray to rewind. They called you replaceable. But no one stays long enough to forget you. They silenced your love. Now every quiet moment screams of you. You were gold. They wanted glitter. They couldn't handle your light. Now stumble in the dark. They said you were dramatic. But their dreams still star you. You didn't break them. Their reflection did. They left your messages unread. Now read your absence daily. They flirted with freedom. And lost grace. You were the answer. They questioned you away. They didn't lose you. They lost access to heaven. You showed them the stars. They looked for exits. They chose comfort. Now ache for your chaos. You were love incarnate. They weren't ready for resurrection. They hid behind logic. You moved with spirit. You weren't needy. You were prophecy begging to be heard. They feared drowning. You were the ocean of healing. You gave sanctuary. They chose exile. They joked about your tears. Now drown in their own. You whispered forever. They heard fear. They confused your clarity with control. You gave all. They kept score. They said too deep. Now miss drowning in you. They buried the seed. Then mourned the garden. You cried in color. They lived in grayscale. They said it wasn't love. Why do they still ache? You were the truth. They picked comfort. They needed your love to survive. Only learned that in your silence. If this touched your soul, don't scroll, like, comment your favorite quote, and subscribe for more. They ran from your storm, now pray for your rain. You weren't the one who abandoned. You were the one who awakened. Their healing started the moment you stopped answering. You were the warmth. They mistook it for fire. They didn't break you. They broke their own blessing. You were the lesson, written in divine ink, not pencil. They forgot your voice. Still hear it in songs they skip. You didn't ruin them. You revealed them. You were their compass. They chose the maze. You gave soul. They wanted spectacle. They loved attention. You gave eternity. You were rare. They mistook you for familiar. They chose ease. You carried depth. They settled for noise. You were the frequency of God. They left you on read. Now reread the ache. You weren't intense. You were sacred. They feared being known. You offered full seeing. You weren't a storm. You were the sky shifting. They confused your light with performance. It was prophecy. They loved your magic. Hated your mirror. They didn't understand your silence. Now beg for your noise. You weren't a mistake. You were a divine mirror. They couldn't name you. Now can't stop whispering you. They sought thrill. You brought awakening. You gave resurrection. They mocked the grave. They ran from your love. Still dream of your touch. You weren't a ghost. You were God's echo. They regret you privately, but pretend joy publicly. You spoke truth. They weren't fluent in it. They couldn't match your depth. So they blamed your waves. You planted peace. They demanded fireworks. They told people you were over, but can't forget your scent. They say they've healed. Then check your page at 2 a.m. You weren't intense. They were shallow. They wanted control. You offered freedom. You gave prophecy. They wanted poetry. You were presence. They clung to absence. They didn't break up with you. They broke up with growth. You weren't love lost. You were light denied. They chose someone simple. Now miss your sacred chaos. You weren't too much. You were the mirror they feared. They scroll for closure, but stare into echoes. They forgot how you held space. Now drowning in their own silence. You didn't ask too much. They gave too little. You weren't a phase. You were the pulse. They blocked you. Still keep your old messages saved. You offered redemption. They wanted attention. They missed the version of themselves you loved. They told you to heal, but never expected you'd outgrow. You didn't fade. You evolved. They told stories about your weakness. Now rewrite them in whispers. You were their light. They blamed you for the shadows. They touched your body, but never entered your spirit. You gave them the sky. They complained about clouds. They ran from truth. Now lie awake. You forgave them. Their soul never did. You weren't chaos. You were the wind breaking their illusion. They dismissed your dreams. Now haunted by them. You were a doorway. They wanted walls. They only loved you when you were silent. You were the song. They skipped the verse. They chose comfort. You chose clarity. You didn't lose them. They lost everything sacred. They hid from your power. Still tremble at your memory. You gave roots. They chose wings. They asked for time. You gave timelessness. You weren't the end. You were the mirror. They betrayed your light. Now blind in their own dark. You made them feel. They weren't ready. They miss who they were with you, but won't admit it. You weren't the one. You were all of them. They wanted a muse. You were the cathedral. You prayed for them. They played with you. You gave them healing. They feared the mirror. They looked for flaws. Now crave your essence. You stayed. They strayed. You gave breath. They blew it out. They forgot your worth, yet still visit the ruins where your presence used to breathe. They faked strength. But the nights howl your name into their spine. They replaced your body, not your silence. Your absence turned their joy into an echo chamber. They held your heart like glass, now they bleed from shards they can't sweep. You were their light. Now they curse every sunrise that doesn't hold your face. They said you were just a phase. Then cried when your season never returned. They couldn't carry your soul, now they drown in hollow arms. My child, you were the prayer they forgot they begged for. They called you dramatic, yet their shadow still flinches at your memory. You left quietly. Their peace hasn't known silence since. They deleted your messages. But their fingers still type your name in haunted sleep. Your goodbye aged them faster than time ever could. They mocked your depth, now thirst in the shallow they chose. They thought you'd beg. You rebuilt. Now they pray to the pieces they broke. You were their shelter. They chose a storm. They feared your intensity until they tasted a world without warmth. My child, their ego was loud. But your absence is louder. They chose easy. Now they cry for holy. You were too much, only for souls with nowhere sacred inside them. They left with pride. Returned with none. They called you clingy. Now they clutch ghost-laced pillows. You were never the wound. You were the balm they rejected. They said move on. But still monitor your silence like scripture. They couldn't feel your soul. Now they chase imitations with empty hands. Your love haunts them kinder than their cruelty ever touched you. They forgot your light. But every mirror still remembers. You weren't a chapter. You were the author. They let you go, and now their peace stinks of regret. They sought your replacement. Instead found echoes in cold. You brought heaven. They chose habit. They laughed when you cried, now cry where your laughter used to bloom. They left for attention. Returned for presence, but found silence. They tried to erase you. Now even their dreams betray them. You didn't leave them. Their soul went blind. They missed your love. But not the lesson. You gave them grace. They gave you doubt. Now they drink regret. They left when your light dimmed. Forgot you were recharging. You weren't hard to love. Just too honest for their masks. They chose illusion. You became irreplaceable. They wanted convenience. You carried cosmos. My child, they lied to themselves harder than they lied to you. They mistook your gentleness for emptiness until loneliness answered. You were their mirror. They smashed it, now wander without identity. They remember your silence more than their own voice. They crave closure. But your absence is the sermon. You didn't lose them. You shed what wasn't holy. They whispered your name, hoping the wind would forgive what their mouth never did. You walked away calm. They've been chasing storms since. If this touched your soul, don't scroll, like, comment your favorite quote, and subscribe for more. They stopped answering. But never stopped checking. They silenced your tears. Now they drown in their own. You gave your soul, they offered doubt. They chose to forget you. Now your silence writes every page of their guilt. They traded sacred for simple. Now ache for your voice in crowded rooms. You weren't too much. You were just too true. They blocked your light. Then begged for fire. They searched for a you without the mirror. You gave closure they never deserved. They tried to fake peace, but your memory keeps calling. They treated your presence like air until they choked without it. You were a cathedral. They left for cardboard. They saw your pain, but not your power. They said you were dramatic. Now can't stop rereading your silence. They feared your truth. Now beg lies to sound like love. You gave them meaning. They gave you maybe. They saw you as replaceable until their new love spoke your name mid-sleep. You were the warmth. They chose applause. My child, they rejected heaven, now hell whispers you. They don't miss you. They miss who they were in your light. They left for less. Now pray for pieces. You were magic. They wanted tricks. They gaslit your love, now burn with want. They ran from healing. Now your name is a wound. You walked away in silence. Their world's been loud with loss ever since. They forgot your soul spoke in presence, not in posts. They thought love had a volume, yours was frequency. They chased thrill. Lost devotion. You offered truth. They drank illusion. They confused attention with connection. Then you disappeared. You weren't replaceable. Just prophetic. They faked closure. Now live wide open in regret. You were sanctuary. They chose scenery. They thought they left. But you left first, spiritually. They danced around the truth. You became its altar. They lied. And still can't breathe where your truth lived. They wore your name like perfume until it burned. They traded a soul for something scrollable. You were never too much. Just not for the small-hearted. They sold your love cheap. Now can't afford peace. My child, they touched glory and ran. They hated your honesty. Now live with lies that don't hug back. They let go too soon. You bloomed in their absence. You gave sanctuary, they packed for war. You were peace. They chased noise. They called you intense, but missed drowning in your eyes. You weren't hard to love, just not convenient to break. You disappeared from their life, not their spirit. They made a decision. Now live beside its ghost. You didn't lose them. They lost home. They blamed your love, but still craved the softness they now call rare. You weren't the wound. You were the healing they feared. They let go, then spent lifetimes building altars to your absence. You forgave in silence. They screamed into their own reflection. They chased fantasy. Now your truth rewrites every dream. You weren't their ending. You were their test. They touched divinity, then ran from the light. You loved beyond ego. They answered with escape. They forgot your worth. Now everything feels counterfeit. You were too soul for their surface. They fed your fears. You grew anyway. You became poetry. They stayed stuck in hashtags. They mocked your magic. Now pray for signs. You waited in faith. They wandered in noise. They blamed your depth, then drowned in shallow replacements. You weren't hard to reach. They just feared arrival. They chased bodies. You became atmosphere. You were never gone. Just no longer explainable.